Yep.
And that's exactly what the revolving door is that these lobbyists will pay the staff to push these things through, because you can't give money directly to a candidate, but you can make bribing legal with that third party. If it's a super PAC or if it's lobbying, and then lobbyists know that in exchange, 50% of elected officials out of office are going to go and become a lobbyist.
Right.
Well, it's also, the revolving door is also very important at lower levels too, because where do these staff people come from? They come from the industries, right? They're vetted and they're approved. You don't get on a congressional staff unless maybe you're in a Thomas Massey's office or Bernie Sanders' office, some type of rogue congressperson, unless you're vetted and approved by the people that you are going to be conducting oversight on. But Justin, I think I saw your hand go up there.
Well, I was just to this point about, lobbyists sort of writing policy. I think what we hear about in political talk a lot is term limits. And, I don't really think that's the answer. I think they did a study and said that, where term limits have been enacted, lobbyists actually have more power. Because then the elected officials have to lean on them even more for their expertise because they're just rookies. I mean, I don't know any other line of work where we would say less experience is an asset. And I don't think politics are really any different. I think what the problem is not that there's no term limits. It's just this money influencing our government. It's this big money in politics that's the real root of the problem, not this idea of term limits.
Well, that's the cool thing again about that American Anti-Corruption Act is the ideal legislation. So I mentioned earlier that I come from intellectual property law, and our patents, the title has to be indicative of the claims. I look at bills and laws analogous to that. So again, Inflation Reduction Act shouldn't have been named that, and it didn't do that. So the American Anti-Corruption Act has term limits, and it mitigates PACs and super PACs and lobbyist bundling, and term limits, and redistricting with gerrymandering, but not all gerrymandering is unconstitutional, let's say for geological reasons, and ranked choice voting. So it's the ideal. It's they developed the American Anti-Corruption Act was developed by a former FEC chairman back in 2012. Represent Us picked it up a few years ago. So it's already been, the more that we can keep pushing that, you know what I mean, and really take a look at it. And it's a model legislation. So if there's things that we can tweak and massage in there, but it already has a 90% approval across party lines. The people want this, but the politicians that are getting all the money, they don't have a vested interest in pushing it. So that's why I just keep pushing every day, just hammering.
I want to put the brakes on this discussion of term limits. We have the power already for term limits. If the guy or gal's an incumbent, vote for the other person. We have the power today. We don't need laws written by corrupt politicians to figure out when they're out of office.
Well, again,
people have that power. Just don't vote for an incumbent.
The incumbents have 89% re-election rate.
Don't vote for an incumbent.
It's just to say that is not enough. So if we make a law with it, that if I were to write that in, I'm not a corrupt politician.
If you favor term limits, act with your vote. Don't wait for somebody else to tell you how to do it.
That's what I'm talking about with the American
Anti-Corruption. If the party, there's a guy or a gal running in a party, they're term limited out. Do you think the person stepping in behind them for a dominant party is going to be any different? You're going to get the same ideology. So term limits, because the party is going to put up another stooge, is going to give you the same result without or with those term limit laws.
Well, that's the thing, that the big money, again, is fueling those stalemates when it comes to ideology. There's all kinds of polls. There are Republicans that support abortion rights, mostly in the West and North.
But if you're a good Republican, use for example, you're working your way up the party, the guy ahead of you retires, you're of the same ilk. You're talking to the same people, you're making the same deals, you're in the same conversations. You're going to look just like the guy that retired. So term limits, whether you kick them out 2 years earlier, 4 years earlier, 6 years earlier, you're still going to get the same thinking because it's the party that's propping up the candidate.
Not necessarily, because the money itself, again, is stalemating at such a low efficacy of 30%. So when it comes to, you have to look at that American Anti-Corruption Act.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, I agree with Mike. In principle, I agree with Mike, but like I'm saying, like, it's just people are literally buying elections. It's just like they're just spending so much money that they're able to just be the most loud, the loudest voice in the room. Yeah, again, so it goes back to it's the money, quite frankly.
Well, look at it in
so
several
how do you guys
so
as guys without money, I mean, unless you guys have really doing something remarkable from an independent third party perspective in terms of having equivalent amounts of money, and one of the things I was reminded of, if people haven't seen it, a few years ago HBO had a film out called The Swamp.
Yes.
And they followed Matt Gaetz and Tom Massey around. Excellent film. And it's really excellent film. And regardless of what you think of them, it's an excellent film. But Matt, a great scene with Tom Massey where he's got to walk across the street to basically Republican headquarters there. And he's got to get his list of who he has to call, right? Has to call. That's the rules, right? You got to call all these people and ask for money. And it's like a phone book. He's got to call. I mean, it is a remarkable scene. But anyway, the idea being, if that's the reality of this, right? What do you guys do to counter that? I mean, how do you guys, as outsiders, as independent third-party candidates who don't have the same access for money, you don't have an Act Blue or Run Red or whatever the Republican network is, and everything. What are y'all doing about that?
I'm going to say the same thing. If you want to get rid of K Streets and influence, that American Anti-Corruption Act is a solution.